A day that I knew was coming, just didn't know when. I've been back and forth on this issue for a better part of a year. When I came here, I was 50 years old, but I felt like I was 30. I was full of energy, anxious to do a good job. But now I'm 69, and I feel like I'm 89. And the only people still here that were younger than me when we came in are Jay Costa, Anthony Williams, Lisa Buscola, Jake Corman, Joe Scarnati, and Vince Hughes. Now, Vince, I'm not sure. We came in at the same time. He looks the same as he did 20 years ago. So I'm not sure if he's 40 or 80. Is Vince here? Many good friends. And if you remember that time, this was truly a bald, white-haired, old white man's place. Now, the average age was probably in excess of 62. And for somebody like myself, I said yesterday, it was like walking into a personal care home. And you had guys on oxygen tanks, and it was truly different. And these were people that served unbelievable long terms here. My second day in office was my first rude awakening. Our newspaper room back there. I walked into the older senators were sitting there, kibitzing. The light was on, the door was open. I walked in, grabbed my Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, sat down to read, and they were both Republicans. And one looked up at me and said, "Young man, I don't remember you being invited into this conversation." And that's a true story. It really happened. I didn't have many goals. I had no political experience, didn't know what to expect. I went down there with the idea of bringing attention to the 41st District, which in my opinion had become invisible over the last several decades. I knew I had to surround myself with a great staff. I learned that in business. Always surround yourself with smarter people than you. And in my case, that wasn't necessarily so hard. I didn't want to ever be put in a situation where I enriched myself, my family, or my friends, and most importantly of all, do no harm to the institution. The memories, the votes that I've made in the past, the pension vote. There I was there 3 months. This was March of 2001. We cast a vote on this floor to increase our pension basically by 50%. And I remember being approached by our leaders at that time and said, "Don, we need you on this." I said, "Oh, well, look, I promised back home I'd never vote for a pay raise." Well, this ain't a pay raise. You can vote for this. And when I said no, they said, "Okay, you sit in the back there and you just keep your mouth shut and don't try to sway any votes." And in those days, that's the way it was. A new guy, you sat with your mouth shut and sit there and listen and learn. The gaming vote. There were only 7 of us at that time. There were 7 Republicans that cast votes in favor of gaming. We had a majority of 30 seats. And it wasn't received real well by our leadership. They weren't giving us any votes. And of the 5 of the yes votes were all getting casinos. Joe and I were the only 2 votes that weren't getting casinos and also really didn't want one. Of course, the pay raise. That was an abomination that I'll take to my grave, and we saw what the public had to say about it quite clearly. You know, and another experience, that first year, I went to my majority leader at that time, and I said, hey, I could really use a project back home. It's something I've been working on. This is my third year. And this leader turned to me and said, look, the jury's still out on you. For all we know, you're going to be a one-term wonder. And now, 4 elections later, 3 of which I was unopposed, I think I did okay. Any success that I had as far as bringing things home to the district that was needed, I credit to Bob Jubileer and this super leadership team that I have now with Joe Scarnati, Jake, and Pat Brown. They always had an ear for the needs in the 41st, and I'll forever be grateful. The debates we used to have on the floor. That first term, that was the most exciting part of the day for me. Anytime Vince Fumo would walk in and take that coat off and undo the tie, you knew somebody over here was in deep crap. Because he never lost a debate that I ever witnessed. The guy used to sit right back there where John does, Barry Stout. Barry Stout was a legend in this chamber for his unbelievable knowledge of transportation issues, but he would do every budget here, he'd do a little show and tell. And for those of us that were here for Barry, he's looking down at us and he's still laughing. I feel I'm probably the most unlikely senator to ever sit in this chamber. My only qualifications, I was a voter, strong voter. I was a veteran, proud veteran, and I was a pretty damn good businessman. I made 6 figures in my business every year from the time I was 29 years old. But during that time, I wrote a lot of checks. A lot of checks, but I wouldn't give you 1 minute of my time. Didn't want to be bothered. I didn't want to run for school board. I didn't want to go for borough council. I had no interest in politics whatsoever. In fact, despised that profession. I've had a great life. You know, my priorities were a little messed up. I always said my priorities were my family, my business, and golf. And sometimes I got those all mixed up. I missed a lot of time at home. My kids were young. That's why I so much admire all of you that have children at home. And you can do this job and be a good senator and be good pap, too, or mother. That's an amazing feat that you all, I didn't have that issue. My daughter was already in college. Memorial Day weekend of 1998 is a day my life changed. I've had a pretty idyllic life up until then. My son was Ben, who was 19 years old the day before he graduated from Kiski Prep. And he was killed in a freakish car accident. The driver drifted off the road, fell asleep. He lived about 7 hours. And he was an organ donor, something he signed up for himself when he was eligible to drive. And some people somewhere are walking around with a piece of Ben with them. I went into a deep funk, a very dark, dark place. I had people who meant well who said, that God had a purpose for taking Ben. I didn't find that consoling at all. Tell him to take somebody else's 19-year-old son. My friends, after putting my head in a bottle and becoming as obscure as I could be, sitting for hours in dark rooms, not talking to anybody, my faith totally destroyed. And then to think there's something that happened 14 months later, I'm running for Senate. And that would have never happened if somebody, a higher power, hadn't decided that this was where I was going to leave my mark, and where I was finally going to give back. Because there's no explanation for it. On New Year's Eve and the millennium, I called Christine Toretti, who I've known since she's a little girl and Republican National Chairwoman. And I said, Christine, I'm going to run. She said, run for what? It was supposedly a dead end being a Republican running that district. A lot of people turned it down. Sam Smith, who was a 15-year member of the House at that time, turned it down. He was on a threshold of being in leadership in the House, and he didn't want to leave. He became whip that very same year, and we all know the story after that. And he's been such a dear friend to me. This has been 1/4 of my life, assuming I make it to 76. I think my staff, Marcy Bowers, who's been gone now 5 years, it's hard to believe, was one of the persons in the pool that I got to pick for my secretary. She worked for Senator Salvatore before me forever. And if it hadn't been for her, I don't know if I'd have made it. She was an incredible warm blanket for me and gave me such an education. She knew everybody, and can't thank her enough. The rest of my staff, I've never fired anybody in 19 years, mainly because I would always hand it off to Joe Pittman, and he knew what I was looking for. Real public service people that did not come here just for a paycheck, and that was accomplished. Any accomplishments I made were due to a true team effort with the help of my leaders, but also back home. In 2000, my home county of Indiana, and also the district as a whole, we sat there waiting for something to fall in our lap. We really had very little economic activity or economic leadership, and that has changed. And those dedicated people made things happen. I, in particular, remember, like we all do, not the victories, but the defeats. I campaigned in 2000 on property tax reform. Never accomplished that. I was looking, Indiana's a tough place to get to unless you know where it is. I was campaigning on a 4-lane limited access road between Indiana and Katanning. Even with Congressman Schuster, I still couldn't get it done. And so many other things that we've debated back and forth, that I found out that politics is truly local. We do, if we want to keep getting reelected, we've got to represent the people who put us here. I've made great friendships, and I'm hopefully leaving here with no enemies. Any advice from this humble servant is to remain humble. Remember, you're only as good as your last reelect. And those people back home need your attention. Respect one another. This political environment we have today, whether it's D.C., not so much here yet, is very caustic, toxic, and it takes people to understand and respect one another if we ever hope to accomplish anything. My sincere thanks to all of you for making these 19 years the most fascinating and worthwhile years of my life. I love you all. God bless you in this great, great Commonwealth. Thank you so much.